Welcome to the Twin Bill Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Bolahan. 40 years ago, the Detroit Tigers started their season off with an incredible 35-5 record on the way to defeating the San Diego Padres in the World Series. Lance Parrish was their catcher and cleanup hitter, and his solo home run ended up being the deciding run in the clinching Game 5 of the World Series. Over the course of his career, he made 8 All-Star teams, won 6 Silver Sluggers, and 3 Gold Gloves, all while hitting 324 home runs. His book, The Enchanted Season, covers his whole career but focuses on that special 1984 season. I had a great time talking to him. I hope you enjoy. Lance, thank you so much for joining the podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing awesome.
I love it. That's great. So 40 years since 1984, and the new book is fantastic, The Enchanted Season. I learned so much. At what point did you realize that this was going to be a special season, an enchanted season?
Well, I'll be honest with you. It took a while. You know, you never know what's going to transpire throughout the course of the season, obviously. I felt like our team in '83, when the season finally came to an end, we felt like we were right there knocking on the door. Obviously, Baltimore won our division that year, and even though we had a better record against them during the season than they had against us, nobody else seemingly could help us out along the way. So, and maybe we weren't ready at that point. Baltimore was clearly just a better team. But when we went to spring training the next year in '84, we felt like, all right, this is our year. We need to raise our game to the next level. And we felt like we had the talent on our ball club. So, you know, we went through spring training. Spring training wasn't really all that, different than any other spring training. I don't even think we had a winning record in our spring games. But, I think that was only because Sparky put a lot of emphasis on trying to get as many people into the games as possible to get a look at everybody. And we worked endlessly on fundamentals. I mean, almost to the monotonous stage where we did things over 1,000 times just to make sure we had it down right. But when the season started, as everybody might recall that followed us, we started out 35-5. I mean, I think that's when the enchanting part of it started to enter into the equation, that we felt like, hey, we've got something going here. We've got a pretty good team. We've gotten off to a start that, in my recollection at that time, nobody had ever gotten off to before. And I don't think anybody ever will again. Just saying.
No,
I mean,
no.
To win 35 of your first 40 games is pretty amazing. So, and we were 17-0 on the road.
That's incredible. That's the most incredible part of it to me. Exactly. That's unbelievable.
It was. The whole thing was unbelievable. So, I think that's when we really started thinking, hey, it's time to get serious. We have a good ball club, and we could accomplish some big things this year.
So I want to get back to the 35-5, but I want to go back to the beginning of your career here. There's some great stuff in the book about the beginning of your career. Your first round pick, you go to the minors, you're playing third base, and they're making you switch hits.
Yeah.
And you had never, at this point, you'd never switched hit before, right?
Never had, no. I mean,
and they're taking their first round pick, and they're like, hey, learn to switch hit in the pros. And that's what they're making you do.
Right. Well, it's funny. Not too long ago, when I was managing for the Tigers in West Michigan, our single-A club up there, our farm director had come by, and we were just sitting around talking, about everything and anything. And the conversation turned to my exploits in the minor leagues. And I brought that up, that after my rookie year, they signed me as a third baseman. And when the season was over, I was called into our farm director's office at the time, Hoot Evers, and he said, so here's the deal. We're going to switch you from third base to catcher, which really wasn't a big deal to me, to be honest with you, because I had caught from Little League all the way through high school. I was probably more surprised they signed me as a third baseman than anything. So they told me they were going to switch me to catcher, and they wanted me to switch hit. And I was like, you want me to switch hit? And he said to me, look, with that short porch in right field in Detroit, if you ever get the hang of this, there's no telling how many home runs you would hit. And I go, yeah, but I've never switched hit before. and I had just turned 18 years old during the course of the summer. So it was like, so the farm director for the Tigers, when I was managing, when I told him this story, he just started laughing. He goes, you you know how long I would be in this job if I did that to our first round pick? He said, I'd have been fired yesterday.
Oh yeah,
So, but
unbelievable.
back in those days, it was a little different, obviously, and farm director had the power and whatever to do what he wanted to do, and they thought it was a good idea. The only bad thing in my way of looking at it was I spent the entire year in A ball in Lakeland, switch hitting, only to find out at the end of that year that they didn't want me to switch hit anymore. So it was like I just wasted a whole year. And I actually felt like I was starting to get the hang of it. And they just pulled the plug on it. So it was like, well, okay, whatever.
Do you remember how you did hidden lefty?
Well, I don't think I hit any home runs. I can tell you that. For me, because I'd never done it before, and I didn't even have a hitting coach, if you can believe that. I did not have a hitting coach in A ball. We had Stubby Overmeyer was our manager, who was like a 5'8" left-handed pitcher that got a little bit of time in the big leagues. And then we had another coach. Our only other coach was a pitcher as well. So here I am, a number one draft pick in my second year, trying to learn how to switch hit. And I didn't even have anybody to give me any advice or watch me or tell me, to do this or do that. So I was totally on my own.
That's
so
crazy.
I started out and I literally could not pull the ball. Everything I hit was the other way. I was just trying to track it and put a bat on it. It was like starting from square one. So, as I progressed through the season, I guess I didn't progress fast enough. So at the end of the year, and Les Moss became my manager in Double-A, who I mentioned in the book as well. And he came up to me after that year when season was over. I went to instructional ball again for the second year in a row. And he came up to me and said, so here's the deal now. You're not switch hitting anymore. You're betting. You got too much power right-handed to be screwing around left-handed. And I was just like, wow, you got to be kidding me. So it was crazy.
So that you talk about that year at Lakeland, and you end up actually catching Mark Fidrich the year before he sets the world on fire. Did you have any hint that he was capable of what he did? Because that's another unbelievable thing that happened.
Well, I was, pretty naive back then anyway. I was just an 18-year-old kid. I didn't know nothing about nothing. Did I think Mark was talented? Yes. We had signed the same year, the year before, and played on a team in Bristol, Virginia in rookie ball where we kind of set the league on fire. We had a great team. But I did not catch him that year. I caught him the following year, like you say, in Lakeland. And I was just basically trying to get my feet on the ground and get used to catching in that Florida heat every day where I thought I was going to die. I sweat so much. But, Mark was very intense. I thought, he was a, primarily sinker slider guy. But, he had great command. He could keep it down around everybody's knees all day long. And consequently, even though he didn't have a great record when they moved him up, he had shown them enough to where they wanted to, push him a little bit and see how he could handle it. And he just shot right to the big leagues. And obviously the rest is history. But, all of us that signed with him and played with him were like super excited for him.
Oh, yeah.
And he had an amazing run up there. And it was mind boggling, actually.
Yeah.
This is the bird. How's the bird up there doing all this,
Did he have? I assume he had the same quirks when you were playing with him.
He did. That's all genuine. None of that was made up when he got there. That's who he was.
Oh, that's great. So fourth game of the '84 season, you catch Jack Morris's no-hitter.
Yeah.
Another crazy thing that happens early in the year. This was the first no-hitter you caught. When do you realize that you're catching a no-hitter, and does that change the way that you're calling a game at all?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I've caught quite a few games, and there are a lot of guys that, might have a no-hitter going into the fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh inning. So it's, try not to pay any attention to it. Obviously, the main objective is to win the game. But, as a catcher, I obviously at some point take notice of it. And it's like, hey, got something going here. He's got good stuff. Could happen. I caught a lot of guys that, took no-hitters into the eighth and ninth inning only to have somebody ruin it for him. So the objective there was to see how long we could hang on to it and see if Jack could rise to the occasion and get the job done, which, obviously he did. But it was just, it was kind of an unorthodox no-hitter, if I might say that. I think he walked 6 guys in
I
the
think it was
game.
6. Yeah, yeah.
And at one point in the game, which is hard to believe when you pitch a no hitter, he had the bases loaded and nobody out at one time and got out of that and still pitched a no hit shutout. So, uh, you know, maybe that even makes it more amazing that he was
Yeah.
able to accomplish what he accomplished. But he had great stuff that day. I thought the umpire was squeezing him a little bit. Um, so I was just hoping, I always keep my fingers crossed and pull for my guys. Hopefully they can get it done. So he was able to do it, and it was just, it was a fun day. I mean, when it was all said and done, we're all jumping around out on the field. Then we carried it into the clubhouse, and we're celebrating in the clubhouse. So it was, doesn't happen very often. So it was just a big day for all of us on the ball club.
That's great. So you mentioned the 35-5 start. Again, incredible. Probably will never be done. Last year, the Rays started off by winning their first 13 games, and then they kind of fizzled out. Starting off that hot isn't always a good thing necessarily, I think. What did it do for you guys, though?
Well, I will say this. I don't know if it was a good thing or a bad thing. I think that we just all kind of took it in stride because we never knew how long it was going to last for. Just enjoy it while you can, kind of an approach. I think as time wore on, though, I think there started to build a little bit more pressure because of that. That okay, here we are, and I'll just fast forward from the beginning of the season until we actually won our 35th game out in Anaheim. Okay, now all of a sudden we're looking at the standings, and here's the Tigers on top, 35-5, and I think everybody started thinking, wow, the expectations went from like right here to way up here. And how are we going to maintain this pace? Or if we don't win, we're going to be ridiculed by everybody in baseball that you guys started out 35-5. You couldn't even win your own division or win, the whole thing. So that became, pretty, pretty hot topic around the clubhouse. I mean, Sparky reminded us, hey, we can't afford any letdowns. You can't take your foot off the pedal, all of that sort of thing. And he did his very best, as did the coaching staff, to try to keep us motivated throughout the summer. But if you followed our record, from the beginning to the end of the season, we had a very good start. We finished up strong. And in the middle, it was a grind. I mean, we were just a few games over 500 in that middle stretch. But, uh, sometimes it just works out the way it works out. But, baseball's not easy. I mean, even though we got off to the amazing start we got off to, we knew that there were some great teams in the American League, especially in our division. I think a different team had won our division like 4 or 5 years in a row. So, it was a strong division.
Yeah.
And after we had gone 35-5, I think all of a sudden, every time we showed up somewhere, we had a big bullseye on our back because everybody wanted to knock us off. And,
Yeah.
I think they raised their game to the next level to try to, show us who was who. So, that became a little bit more difficult. And the other thing was Toronto. When we went 35-5, I remember we flew to Seattle. I got up the next morning and grabbed the newspaper just so I could see where we were in the standings and to see in print, the Tigers 35-5. Well, Toronto was right behind us. I said to myself, if we lose a series now and they win a series, they're going to be right behind us, which they were for quite some time until we were able to put a little distance between ourselves and them towards the latter part of the season.
So you mentioned Sparky a little bit there.
Yeah.
What does he do for that 84 team? I mean, you guys are obviously, there's so much talent there. What does he do to get you guys to continue to go to where you need to go that whole season?
I'm not going to say that he was, a taskmaster by any stretch, but he had, he was a veteran manager. He had been there, done that. He ran the big red machine for a long time. He knew what it took to be successful. And even though the Cincinnati Reds, as great as they were, might never have started out 35-5, they had some great teams. And I think, if anything, that gave him the knowledge and experience on how to deal with us uh, through the stretch of going 35-5 and beyond. So he knew what buttons he needed to push. And, I think at that point, he had been on our team long enough to know who he needed to kick in the butt to motivate and who he needed to pat on the back. And, so he knew us quite well. And, we had our share of team meetings. about staying focused, about, doing this or doing that. And again, it wasn't just him. I think it was our entire coaching staff that, got on board and tried to keep the ship, pointed in the right direction. And it wasn't always easy, like I said, but we weathered that middle stretch of the season, weathered that storm, and came out of it pretty well. And I think once the postseason rolled around, we were geared up and ready to go. So I think that was his objective, and I think he accomplished it.
Well, in the book, you talk a little bit about how Roger Craig really had a huge impact
Yes,
on this team.
yes.
What role did he play?
Well, I mean, for one man to run an entire pitching staff and try to keep everybody motivated and try to keep everybody happy and content and focused, and it's not an easy job. I tip my hat to all pitching coaches out there because it's not easy. You're dealing with a lot of personalities, and we certainly had our share of personalities. But he had a great demeanor. He was a great teacher. He was a great motivator. And he was a great leader, and I think he was not only a great leader, but a great baseball man in general. And he sat right behind Sparky every day, every game on that bench. And I think, it was good for Sparky to have Roger to bounce things off of. And I think, Roger imparted some of his wisdom and maybe pulled the reins on Sparky periodically to keep him from flipping out on occasion and, just keeping him focused as well. I just thought Roger was an amazing guy, and I think that proves out because after he left us, when he eventually left the Tigers, went on to San Francisco to manage them and had quite a successful run with them as well. So I can never say enough nice things about Roger. I think, again, just to reiterate, our pitchers loved him, and he was a great teacher, and he knew how to fix things when they were going bad or, ran into some issues along the way. And it was a great learning experience for me because not only was he teaching them, he was teaching me. And I tried to pay attention to the little, tweaks that he made here and there and the advice that he gave those guys. And I think that benefited me along the way as well.
Yeah. So again, a great season. You're having a great season. You're on the All-Star team. There's a story I didn't know. You have a little run-in with Steve Garvey at the All-Star game. What happens there? Did you ever end up talking to Steve about that?
No, I never did. But after that incident happened, I was hopeful that I would have an opportunity to repay him for his, kindness that day. Crazy story where, and again, and I'll say this, I don't believe in the entire time I was ever catching, and I don't even know why I was doing it at that All-Star game, but I was chewing gum. I had a big wad of bubble gum in my mouth. Okay, and Steve Garvey was either on second base or third base, and maybe he was on second base, and there was a base hit to left field at Candlestick Park in San Francisco. Dave Winfield was in left field. So Dave Winfield fielded it and came up firing to home because Garvey was coming home. The throw was coming in. As Garvey was coming down the line, the throw was tracking right behind him, and it actually crossed the baseline right behind him. So I had to reach over in foul territory and try to catch it and then bring it back over and apply the tag. Well, it was, one of those, it was going to be a bang play anyway. So I knew I only had so much time to catch the ball and get my glove back over. So I stretched out as far as I thought that I could. And when the ball shot by him, I kind of lost it for a second, but then I saw it again when it passed him. And I stuck my glove out, and it just hit off the end of my glove. It didn't quite get in the pocket. But I thought that I had it, but I didn't have it. And I pulled my glove back in, and when I brought it back in, he came in and, forearm shiver right to the jaw. So, and I didn't have my mask on. Obviously, I had taken my mask off. So, boom, and he was safe, and, I was bummed because of that. But I just, the ball was just out of my reach. I just, couldn't stretch quite far enough to get it. But I remember when he hit me, it was like, bam, he hit my jaw, and my jaw slammed together. And I was like, oh my gosh, I felt like I just bit my tongue right in half, So I was holding my mouth, after everything happened, and I was standing there in timeout, and I was holding my mouth looking down, and Dave Steve was pitching. So he was down there as well. And he looked at me and goes, "What happened?" And I go, "Oh my gosh, I felt like I just bit my tongue in half, man." And he goes, "Let me see." So I stuck my tongue out, and just the reaction on his face, told the whole story. He was like, "Oh my gosh!" And I go, and when I went like that, I looked down on my wristband, and there was a chunk of my
Oh my
tongue on
gosh.
my wristband. So I actually bit a big hole right in the middle of my tongue. So I was like, "Oh, that's perfect." So I
Oh,
finished though. I finished my time in the game,
yeah.
um, and when I came out of the game, I went, to the locker room. Obviously, it was down the right field corner, and the trainer was down there, and he had the team, the doctor that was on call that day, come into the clubhouse, and he looked at my tongue, and he's just like, "Well, it'll heal." And I go, "It'll heal." I go, "Well, I mean, there's a big hole in my tongue." I go, "Are you going to do anything?" And he goes, "Well, like, what do you want me to do?" And I said, "Well, can you put a stitch or two in it and sew it up?" I go, "My gosh." And here I am, stupid me. I'm looking at the post game spread that we've got there and it's a big old Mexican spread. And I was salivating over that. I figured if I get any hot sauce in there, it's
Oh,
going to send me right through the roof. So anyway, long story short, he gave me an injection in my tongue and actually sewed that hole shut.
oh
But
wow.
my tongue was so swollen and my mouth was numb. I would talk like that the whole time afterwards. So, but I was able to wolf down a couple burritos and
It's all worth it then. Yeah.
priorities.
Oh, that's great. There are obviously so many big moments that year. Do you have like a personal highlight for you from that season?
Gosh, it's hard to say. I mean, that was the first no hitter I had caught in the
Yeah.
major leagues when Jack threw his no hitter.
Yeah.
I was actually standing on second base when we were playing Toronto in Tiger Stadium later in the middle of the summer, when Dave Bergman put his 13 pitch at bat together off of Roy Lee Jackson to culminate, only to culminate that by hitting a game winning home run on the 13th pitch, I believe. So I'm standing on second base watching him battle his butt off, and then all of a sudden, boom, he hits one into the upper deck. I mean, that was a pretty exciting moment
Yeah.
as well. Um, but, probably the big moment for me, um, rather than when we recorded the final out of the series and we were world champions, was hitting a home run off of Goose Gossage. I mean,
So I wanted to talk about that because that was the game-winning home run, and now somehow Kirk Gibson is now like, oh, the big home run. It's like, no, you hit the game-winning home run. He danced around and threw his arms around,
well,
and
his
everyone
was a little
remembers
more
that now.
dramatic than mine was. So,
I watched yours the other day. You kind of clap your hands around second base. If you were pumping your fists and stuff, I think everyone would remember that one.
well, I mean, it was just the build up to Gibby's that made it
Oh
so.
yeah,
I mean, I know it was fun for me because I had front row. I was standing on deck when all that was going on. And but the home run that I hit was actually the deciding run.
yeah.
Actually, the separated us in that game. So you could look at it that way. And I have to remind people, hey, I
It-
did hit a home run in that game as well. But Gibby's by far more dramatic. It was a lot more fun to watch, and it brought the house down. So it was a big moment. But for me, hitting my home run, and if I'm not mistaken, they brought Goose in specifically to pitch to me
yeah,
out of the bullpen.
yeah.
And I do recall, if you recall, maybe you don't. How old were you back in '84?
I
Were you
was
even around?
negative
I was going
two.
to say you probably weren't even there. So anyway, during the course of the game, when they brought Gossage in to face me, was the year I believe that the movie Ghostbusters came out.
Yes.
So for whatever reason, the guy on the organ started playing the theme music to Ghostbusters. So they went through the little jingle, and then at the end, when everybody would yell Ghostbusters, well, everybody in Tiger Stadium, all 50 plus thousand of them, were yelling Goosebusters instead of Ghostbusters. So I thought that was pretty cool, and I was, kind of getting into it. I had to remind myself, hey, you're on deck. You're going to be facing this guy in a minute. Get focused here,
Yeah.
But just listening to 50,000 plus people, chanting that was pretty fun deal.
Oh, that's amazing. That's really great. Um, my friend wanted me to ask you this question. So after the season, this is not in the book, but you're on different strokes. Uh, what what was that experience like? It's a great clip. It's really, and you know what? You did a really good job. You see a lot of ball player actors. You did a really nice job. You really did.
Well, thank you. Well, I guess that's one of the perks of actually I lived out in Southern California at the time, and you know, why they chose me, I have no idea, but I was more than willing to do it. Not only for the experience, but again, give the Tigers a little more notoriety. So I thought it would be fun to do. And I went down there, and it actually was. I, got to meet everybody, and my lines weren't all that difficult to memorize. So, I kind of got into it. And it's actually fun to look back and watch that clip periodically and reflect on that. So, yeah, it was all part of that World Series '84 experience. So that was a fun opportunity for me.
So this is another thing I didn't really know. Even when I was growing up playing baseball in the '90s, early 2000s, I pitched, and they said, don't lift weights. You don't want to get too big. You were really a pioneer for weightlifting, and now you look at the game today. Everybody's doing it. How did you get into weightlifting? And was there pushback for this with
Oh
you?
my gosh. Well, thank you for bringing that up, by the way, because I do feel like somewhat of a pioneer.
Yeah.
Because back in the day, when I first came up to the Tigers, there was not really what you would call a weight room in our clubhouse. It was a little tiny room in the back somewhere that had a stationary bike and a couple machines that had like hydraulic shocks on them that you could do a couple different exercises. Nothing um, like they have today. I from early on when I was in school was educated on weightlifting with my coaches. A guy by the name of Larry Stutt and Bruce McNeil were both football coaches that I had, and they were big advocates of weightlifting. Got me involved in it, so that's really where I um, experienced it out of the gate and started to learn the benefits of it. And my understanding was, it could never hurt you to be as strong as you could possibly be. The only thing you have to be aware of is trying to maintain your flexibility, which I did. So it was like, okay, I'm trying to get as strong as I can get, and I'm going to try to be as flexible as I can be, or more flexible than anybody that's out there, which I accomplished that as well. Um, so I lifted weights in the minor leagues. I used to carry a dumbbell around with me, to
No
be honest.
way.
In fact, my wife rags me all the time because I brought it on our honeymoon so I could, yeah, that's how crazy I was about it. But, can't miss a workout. I got things I got to do. But so I worked out in the off season. I tried to, build myself up as best I could before the season started. Uh, wasn't a whole lot I could do maintenance wise with the equipment we had. In fact, in the minor leagues, we had zero equipment. Okay. There was no such thing. Nobody went to the gym, any of that. So when I got to the major leagues and you know, I either had to go to a gym somewhere on my own or provide my own weights, and I would just make up my own workouts. I did, a million push-ups. I had a
Yeah.
dumbbell. I did various things until I was able to go to a place that had all the stuff that I needed to use. I actually brought my own weights to spring training one year,
Wow.
and I got nothing but grief from Sparky. In fact,
Oh
he
yeah.
told our clubhouse guy, "You take those weights and throw them out in the middle of the lake because I don't want to see them anymore when I come back here." So I was like, "What the heck?" So anyway, I got nothing but grief from Sparky the whole time. Pete Rose never lifted weights. Al Kaline never lifted weights. I go, well, so that doesn't necessarily mean that it's, a bad thing.
Yeah.
I said, I tried to explain to him the benefits of it, but he didn't want to hear it. So one spring training, which was, I'm going to say, okay, it was 1982. After the 81 season, he went around the clubhouse to everybody before the season was over and gave everybody reporting weights. Okay. You need to come to spring training, X amount of weight, X amount of weight. And for every pound that you're over that reporting weight, it's $100. So he came up to me and said, your reporting weight is 220. And I said, 220? I've played the entire season and I don't weigh 220 right now. So I said, there's no way that I'm going to wait till he goes, well, I'm just telling you, talk to the trainers. They think that that would be your optimal playing weight. And I go, well, okay, whatever. So I went home. I probably worked out as hard as I've ever worked out in my life. And when I came to spring training, I was substantially bigger than 220. It was pretty obvious. So when the day came for us, everybody to weigh in, I got on the scale and I weighed 248. So he never said anything to me. I never had to pay a fine, but he did, throw little digs in the newspaper that I was too muscle bound. I wasn't going to be able to do this. I was going to be more susceptible to injury. Well, even though I was a lot bigger and stronger than I was the year before, I had, stretched like a madman. So I knew that I was more flexible than anybody on that ball club. And I did not pull any muscles and I did not get hurt during the course of the year. But what I did do was I set a home run record for catchers that year in the American League. I hit 32 home runs that year, which surpassed a record that was held by Yogi Berra and Gus Triondos that was set in 1956, the year that I was born. So I thought, okay, well, I've made my point. Somebody actually asked Sparky at the end of the season, so Lance, all this grief you gave him about weightlifting, and he's now set a home run record for catchers and blah, blah, blah. And he said, well, let's just say this. It's not for everybody. Okay, so he left it at that. But that being said, you can go into any minor league clubhouse now. You can go into any major league clubhouse now. Everybody's got a huge weight room. They've got a number of trainers. Uh, it's not just one guy. They've got a whole staff of trainers. So everybody throughout the system now has some kind of a weightlifting program that's being implemented, whether it's catchers, pitchers, outfielders, you name it. Obviously pitchers need to be a little bit more aware of what they're doing. It's not so much the powerlifting approach. You have to have some kind of a design program to benefit you, but I think anybody can benefit from weightlifting if it's done properly.
Oh yeah, I coach high school ball. My high school guys are lifting.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody lifts now.
And I'm an advocate of it. I know if you do it right, it can only help. Again, what's wrong with being stronger if you can get stronger?
And they never made you pay the $2,800 for the.
Never had to do that. No, that was
good. That's great. So the '84 team, they were overlooked, I think, for a pretty long time. It took a while for Jack and Alan to make the Hall of Fame. Lou is still not there.
Yeah.
There's a couple other guys that have a case. You have a case. Do you get the feeling that people are now realizing how great of a team that really was, and you're starting to get that respect?
I would hope so.
Yeah,
I really would. It used to, I think, irritate all of us when we would watch TV and they would talk about the greatest teams in, baseball history. And I'm like, okay, well, we might not have won the most games during the course of a regular season, but 35-5, I mean, come on, who's done that before? We were wire-to-wire champions. We swept the Kansas City Royals in the playoffs. We only lost one game to the Padres in the World Series. So, I mean, that's pretty big accomplishment. Yeah. Plus, Sparky Anderson's in the Hall of Fame, Jack's in the Hall of Fame, Tran's in the Hall of Fame. Gibby was a great player.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably the year that put him on the national stage. I mean, it wasn't that he just came through in a big way in the playoffs. He had a great year. I think he, I want to say he hit 290 something and 20 something home runs, close to 100 RBIs. So he put it all. Plus, he stole a lot of bases for us. He was a force, to be reckoned with. Chet Lemon out in center field. I'll put him against anybody playing center field. He was as good as anybody, patrolling that spacious area out in center field in Detroit. A lot of people forget because I always, look at the dimensions of the ballparks nowadays that they build. In Tiger Stadium, it was 440 feet to straightaway center field, which creates a lot of room to roam around in. And Chet Lemon patrolled that as well as anybody could. So, I tip my hat to him. Lou Whitaker should be in the Hall of Fame. His numbers match up with and are better than a lot of guys that are already in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So, we keep campaigning for him, and hopefully one of these days they'll get it right and get him in there. But
I think so.
we had a solid ball club, great pitchers. The pitching staff was probably the most unheralded, part of the whole deal. We got Willie Hernandez that year, Cy Young Award winner, MVP. Aurelio Lopez, who got bumped out of that role for Willie Hernandez, I think ended up, if I'm not mistaken, he had double digits in saves, and I think he had either a 10-0 or a 10-1 record that year as a setup guy
something
for
like
Willie.
that, yeah.
So, I mean, he had an amazing year. It wasn't a typical deal where Willie Hernandez would come in and get like one out or 2 outs or just pitch the 9th inning. I mean, sometimes Sparky would put him in the 7th inning, to get the last out and then pitch the 8th and the 9th. I mean, that went on all year long. And the same thing with Aurelio. Aurelio was a machine, man. He was a workhorse. He answered the bell every time they asked him to go out there and pitch. So, and our whole staff was full of guys like that. So, they're unsung in my mind. We didn't have any 20-game winners, but we had some pretty competitive guys.
That was Lance Parrish. His book, The Enchanted Season, is out now. We talk to people in and around baseball literature every week on the podcast and publish around 50 writers every year in the Twin Bill Literary Journal. You can support us on Patreon. Until next time,